Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Cinema Savvy. It is myself, George, joined once more by Tate for another entry in the David Fincher Retrospective and the penultimate entry with, of course, The Killer, released in cinemas now. Cinemas, plural. Yes, a couple of them, not many of them. And because it's going to be streaming, unfortunately, on Netflix this Friday. What a way to push that release. But we're here for another episode. We're talking David Fincher's other Netflix film, Mank, of course, released in December 2020. We had a chat 4 Minute Live, the COVID year. I got the years mixed up. That's going to happen more and more. But before we get into anything else, Tate, how are we doing tonight?
Yeah, I may or may not have been just completely thrown by the fact that was our old intro, and I've been stuck with the new intro for the last few videos. And for those who are aware or unaware of the channel, we have got our new intro now, but we're keeping this old intro for the retrospective until it's over. But it completely caught me off guard, and I was like, oh, old intro. But yeah, I'm doing good today.
It's the music, isn't it? That's what I'm noticing now. It's the bombs are gone, but the orchestral tune-up is in. But yeah, check out our videos because you'll notice that straight away. But as always, we do want to hear from people who are watching this retrospective. I want to hear from people that like Mank. Not in a mocking way, but comment your thoughts. I don't think this is the first one that jumps to mind when people think of David Fincher, if I'm just going to get my opening remarks out of the way. But nonetheless, if it is, let us know. And as always, we are building up to, of course, The Killer. We'll have a big video coming out next Monday, the 13th. We might be live, we might pre-record it. We'll have more details on our social medias, which you can go grab us on at linktree.com/cinemasavvy. But no guests today. As I said, we're in a big process to change. So we were going to get Charlie on. We're planning this not even last minute, but we've had a very busy month in October, and we've got a lot of stuff we're pushing for the future and a lot of other great things in the go. So it's just us two today. Opening remarks before we even do the IMDb plot synopsis. Tate, have you seen Citizen Kane? Because I guess this is a bit of context for this video, right?
Well, I have seen Citizen Kane. I actually have Citizen Kane as in my top 10 films of all time. I haven't reordered my top 10 films of all time recently, but it's always been up there. I've seen it multiple times. I think it's a phenomenal feat in filmmaking. I think it's fantastic. Don't ask me what my thoughts on Mank are.
Well, I've not seen it, so at least we've got a good divide for this because we've got both sides of the context spectrum. I do own it. I've had it for like almost a year. I've tried to watch it twice this year.
Is there a 4K release of it?
No, that's what I've got.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And I'll say this, from the 10 minutes I saw, it looked phenomenal. And for people curious about 4Ks, not to plug them briefly, it says it all we're talking about 4K films in the Mank review, but the older films, like I'm talking like pre-1960s, 70s, they're gonna look great anyway. But the restorations happening on the 30s, 40s films look unbelievably, I don't think excellent, that's a shit phrase, but the what they're doing with the restoration on this medium compared to Blu-ray is leaps and bounds stronger than I could have imagined. And that's what it's actually been a great way for me to actually watch some older films. And that sounds really snobby, but Cinderella and Snow White have just had big remasters as well. And they've got like the original camera negatives that they've been touching up and cleaning up, and it makes the wider difference. So, yeah, but we're plugging Citizen Kane because, of course, Mank is all about Citizen Kane. Tate, what is that IMDb plot synopsis?
1930s Hollywood is reevaluated through the eyes of scathing social critic and alcoholic screenwriter Herman J. Mankiewicz as he races to finish the screenplay for Citizen Kane. That covers it. That just about covers it. The basic premise of this film is about the person who wrote Citizen Kane. And, you know, this film, I'm sure we'll go into a little bit about it, but there are some inaccuracies in the presentation of this film. But, you know, Herman J. Mankiewicz did write Citizen Kane with Orson Welles in the production. It's the only Oscar that Orson Welles won in his entire career, if I'm right in saying so.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, which is just fascinating for one of the greatest, screenwriters, directors, actors of all time to, only have that one win in that. I know it's very controversial that Citizen Kane didn't win Best Picture, losing famously to How Green Was My Valley. And, it's one of those where it's kind of everyone knows the story if you're into your film. everyone at least knows of Citizen Kane as a film, as it's the Citizen Kane of films. But this is meant to kind of retell the story from the other writer's perspective, who maybe people don't know the name of. People would have heard of Orson Welles, maybe people haven't heard of Mank, basically.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting that again, going to the background, because I've not seen Citizen Kane still. You have. I think there's a good divide for discussing this film, and really, with this being still fairly recent, the last David Fincher film before Killer, December 2020, it feels a lot longer away than what it actually was. Like, we spoke about Gone Girl with our memories, which was a great discussion. We can talk about that all day. We can talk about some of the other Fincher films, but Mank, the most recent one, if I'm segueing into my thoughts, I have a blur of this. I remember watching it to review on the channel, not because I really cared. And I'm a big fan of Fincher. I love Gary Oldman, and they were two draws for me, but I wasn't like buzzing for the film to come out. It was the COVID year. It was 2020. It was Oscar season, Oscar 2020. We're seeing this film being spoken about all year round. We'll talk about those Oscar type stuff, but it's going to be a really weird review. And I want to kind of get your initial thoughts, if you can remember watching it for the first time, because for me, there will be a review on the channel, but I'm pretty sure I didn't like it from day one, or I was being respectful of it. And my second viewing today, this is what I find interesting, watching Oscar films out of context after the ceremony. It's always a very different, interesting experience. And I'll be honest, I've really, of the films we've done in this series, which has been a great series to do, this is the one I've sort of cared about least. I mean, Alien 3 is a mess, right? But there's a lot to say about why that was.
I can go ahead and say, because I watched the assembly cut of Alien 3, Alien 3, in my mind, is a decent film. This film I have problems with. Now, I cannot remember what my instant first reactions were for it. I think I watched Mank first, then watched Citizen Kane, or one or the other. I watched it one way round on first viewing. And I came out of Citizen Kane thinking, wow, what a phenomenal film, and Mank was okay, I guess. That's kind of the only memory I could recall from it. But yeah, on rewatch, this wasn't as kind of, not even as highly regarded as I would have put it previously. Sometimes you get drawn in by films that are, you know, part of the hype into Oscar campaigns and various different things. And this one had a phenomenally big Oscar campaign behind it, with, what was it, 10 nominations that year, and being one of the standouts in a year that was a COVID year and didn't have the strongest, should we say, calling, you know, for the Academy Awards. So I can't remember if I would have been drawn in by it or not, but all I can say now is this film did not entertain me. It didn't even, you know, really register to me. I genuinely cannot believe I'm saying this, but this film, a Fincher film, made me bored, which is something that none of his films previously throughout this entire retrospective have done at all. And I'm sure that there will be been certain films on the Spielberg retrospective where you go, actually, do you know what, this is a bit boring, you know, and stuff like that. Or at least one, I think, always being the one that I would quote, where it's like, oh, okay, it's a bit, you know. But this is crazy, because this film is one of his highest regarded films, kind of accolade wise. Yet, you know, it's just not that entertaining of a film. I don't know if it's because it's one of those where you can watch it once, you see the story once. As soon as you understand the story, as soon as you understand the characters, as soon as you understand what the message is trying to get across, you don't really need to watch it again. And I do wonder, this time I watched it without the context of Citizen Kane attached to it, so I didn't watch Kane before, after this viewing. I do wonder if this does need to be watched with that film to have any form of impact or context. But at the same time, Hollywood loves stories about Hollywood, and therefore this film would always be given, you know, positive kind of beaming reviews and everything like that. So it's a really fascinating one, because this film bored me, really did bore me. I was screaming to, you know, for the film to pick up the pace or do anything of note. But I don't remember having those same reactions the first time round. So I'm assuming because I knew what was in the film, because I knew how the film would progress, because I knew the standpoints of it, it became less entertaining. And sometimes that happens with film. So maybe that's what's happening here.
Yeah, there's always that saying, isn't it, that you haven't watched a film until you've seen it twice, for better or worse. There's a lot of films I've seen twice and I've ended up hating that I loved, or loved that I hated. And And it's really interesting with where we're going to sort of go with this one, that getting some behind the scenes, because we haven't said the obvious word Oscar bait yet. Now, this is a very personal film to David Fincher. His dad wrote the screenplay before he passed away in the 90s. This film was in production in the late 90s. He was going to do it after the game came out. So you've got to think, right, he's, okay, get Alien out of the way. He's just done he's done Seven, which was this great hit. He's done The Game, which has been well reviewed at the time. Obviously, this is before Fight Club happened, and Mank was next. The script was done by his dad. Kevin Spacey and Jodie Foster were the two leads, which is very interesting given Jodie Foster, of course, would later go on to be in Panic Room, but also have lost out on The Game, which is interesting. And obviously Spacey following on from Seven, of course. And it didn't make it to production because the studios basically said, not in black and white. I'm not going to fund this.
I do wonder his career trajectory, if he decided to go down this route instead of going down the Fight Club route, because Fight Club really put him on the map. Realistically,
no,
I know
Seven did more.
People love Seven. People love Seven, but
Fight Club's had a bigger impact, as the years have gone by.
Yeah.
Not at the time, though, contextually.
True, very true. But you know, when people think of Fincher, you go to Seven, you go to Fight Club, you go to Social Network. It's one of those films. People don't go to Mank at all. And I wonder, at this stage in his career, if he'd done a black and white noir Hollywood film about, you know, the writing of the greatest film of all time, what kind of career path he would have taken, whether he would have taken on more artistic projects going forwards, maybe straying away from kind of, you know, your films like Fight Club and going more into kind of art house cinema and stuff like that, kind of leaning into the kind of, not Oscar bait, but, you know, leaning into that side of film.
It's interesting because the way I see this, and I don't mean this, I know it's a very personal film to him. He spoke in interviews after the film's come out saying no one would touch this film, no one would make this film, but Netflix did. And you got to think, David Fincher, I saw a really interesting tweet actually the other day. People saying David Fincher is the reason Netflix are a success, which I don't agree with, but there's some logic to it because what was Netflix's first ever original series? House of Cards. Who was responsible for getting those out? David Fincher. And
then you got Mindhunter as well, which came out before this film. And
Mank, they thought, was going to be the first time, of course, that Netflix would win Best Film at the Oscars. And I'm not saying the film's been greenlit for various reasons. We know one of the benefits of Netflix has been that they don't get involved creatively. And I know that's a wonderful thing for the production teams, for the directors, for the writers. At the same time, it is also the reason why there is a lot of dreadful projects in there. So it's about getting the balance right of studio interference and actually notes, because studio interference is very different to a studio note. And a film like this, I understand why a single studio would not fund this in the 90s, pre-online, pre-streaming. I understand why no one would put this in a cinema, because I'll be really honest, it doesn't have an audience. It really doesn't have a cinematic audience to pay off a budget such as this. But you put it on a streaming service like what Netflix did. They not only do they operate at a loss, but the way I've sort of seen it, and it's hypocritical to say it's on Netflix. I want to talk about Apple really randomly because of Flower Moon. That's a $200 million film. It's not going to gross $400 million at the worldwide box office to break even. However, Apple are a business that make, I believe, like $35 billion a year profits. Not even revenue, just profit. Apple can afford to put a film like Kiss the Flower Moon in cinemas, still make $100 million, because that's $100 million more than it would make if it hadn't gone to cinemas, if it just gone straight to Apple streaming. But Apple has the prestige of saying, we had Scorsese's new film, we had Kiss the Flower Moon, it's been nominated for X amount of Oscars, it's won X amount of Oscars, and it's still made maybe $100 million at the box office. Now, I'm not just assuming it's going to win stuff, but Apple can afford to do that because it is a prestigious thing for them to have associated to them. Whereas Netflix have never turned profit. They can't, you know, we know why. There's so many reasons why the actors, writers have been on strike and whatnot. And streaming services not sharing their data is the key to, like, I'd say not 50% of it, but if you're looking at the really big talking points, you've got AI, you've got streaming residuals. And the streaming is the problem because Netflix always come out to say our own Netflix original film broke all of our own records, but we won't tell you what they are, and we won't tell anyone what they are. And let's be honest, if you're not sharing that data, you could say we've got the highest grossing film in history and you've never released the box office. Like,
it's like what was it, North Korea putting their football stats out saying, you know, like
they hired actors, didn't they?
Yeah.
They edited highlights at the World Cup to show they didn't lose a game like 3-0.
Yeah.
And I know people probably wouldn't know why happened to another film. Well, this is part of it that I fully am with Fincher that yes, Netflix have funded this for him, which is great. And it's great that this director gets that, you know, gets that freedom to make this film a personal project. And with Fincher's career, you know, it's really, maybe it's hypocritical, but people are like, oh, Scorsese's doing this. Scorsese's earned whatever he wants to do with a budget these days. Certain directors earn that through their, as far as I'm concerned, I know it's not how it works financially, but studios will look at it and say, yeah, we want to fund Scorsese's new film. That's as big a draw as making a profit on it, the prestige of it. And what's interesting with Mank is that after this film came out, he signed a 4-year Netflix deal, to which there's been one film out in the 4 years, which is The Killer. And if I'm being honest, David Fincher's come out this week and actually not criticized Netflix, but he basically said Netflix told me not enough people have watched Manhunter to fund a 3rd season. And I'm just sat there like, also now it's about the audiences, is it? Again, Netflix pick and choose who they want, but you'd be frustrated if you sign a 4-year exclusive deal to a company, to a distributor, and they've actually produced one thing in that 4 years. I'm not saying he's desperate to get out. We don't know that. Again, he's got his freedom, but I'd ask you one thing: is one of the reasons why no one talks about Mank is it because it just was never released to cinemas? Like so many other Netflix films, it came and it went.
Yeah, I think so. And weirdly enough, the only Netflix films that kind of stuck around and done well, and I'll point out that both times it was a better experience in cinema than when I rewatched it at home, was Knives Out and Glass Onion, which have done very well for themselves, I want to point out. But I watched them.
But only one of them's a Netflix film.
True.
Second one.
Yeah, exactly. But I find it absolutely fascinating that this didn't really have... I know COVID, of course, had a big impact on its ability to be released in cinemas, but cinemas still ran. You know, there was still the opportunity for, you know, people to go to cinemas and view things. There were things in place at this point in time when this film came out, I believe. So it does bring into question, you know, should it have had even a limited cinema release? You know, there are some weird, unusual films that get just small-time cinema releases, and then you'll see them on streaming services a few weeks later. So why can't this David Fincher one, especially when this film won Best Cinematography, right? You want cinematography, you want, you know, production design and cinematography to be on the biggest screen possible. You really do. You don't want it to be at home on whatever size screen you watch it on. Like, whether it's, I always think of streaming things at home. It doesn't matter what you watch it on. People are going to be watching it on their phones, and therefore that's a format that you've got to accept. Yeah. And this film, realistically, any film shouldn't be watched on its phone, but this film definitely shouldn't be watched on its phone. So the fact that that is one of the only options to watch this film is crazy. It should have been given a bigger, you know, release so that people would actually go and see the film. And yeah, I think with Fincher and the 4-year deal with Netflix, I think, is it going to be something that he's going to come to regret? I mean, he had a good working relationship with them when it came to Mindhunter, and then they cancelled Mindhunter. He put out this film, and he's done The Killer now. We'll see going forwards. He doesn't have anything lined up, I don't think, after The Killer at the moment. Maybe there will be something coming through, but, you know, it's an interesting one. It's a very, very interesting one, especially when, you know, this film hasn't aged very well. Not in the fact that it's now cancelable or anything like that. It's just no one talks about it anymore, at all. And this film was only out 3 years ago. That's crazy.
That's kind of where I am with it. It's a 3-year-old film that's been forgotten. And I do think, you know, COVID's a massive factor of that, as we spoke about. The fact also it's a black and white drama. I'm not saying there's not an audience for that, but films about films is the most, how would I say it? I know you're not on Twitter, but film Twitter is like a bubble.
Yeah.
And there's always been this great analogy that some people can't comprehend that this bubble on Twitter is not real life, is not the general audience. Because we might know things coming out, the audience don't. We might know what a 3-hour runtime is, people don't. And I do find it very interesting that a lot of films, this can be hyped by critics, insiders, Hollywood, fine. A film about films, a film about Citizen Kane. 90% of people just couldn't care less. 90% of people haven't even seen Citizen Kane. They would have heard of it, but never seen it. And I find it fascinating, these kinds of films. And again, for Netflix, there was the prestige of we want this to win Best Film. The film about film will be the first streaming service to win Best Film at the Oscars. That was a big thing till Apple did it. Loads of other stuff, and it's not worked out. This hasn't even got a Criterion release. And Netflix has let a few of them be made. Not this, which is interesting because the artwork would make a great Criterion cover. That's one great credit, an amazing poster. But talking Fincher, what are your thoughts on his actual direction? Because I'll be really honest, every week we come up, we talk about he's a perfectionist at his craft. He does this, he does this, he does this. Again, we know this is personal, and that's not like not an excuse because I'm not going to slag off, but it's competently directed, and I have almost nothing more to add on that. I don't know Fincher's own thoughts on Citizen Kane. What he spoke about is the fact that obviously the report in the 70s that Mank did actually almost all the writing. That was a very contested thing within the industry, and he very much alleviated towards that. And I know that one of the only changes was that Eric Roth, one of the producers, altered the script to make it, quote, less anti-Orson Welles. But again, it wasn't a driving force because the finished film has come out the way it has, and I can't fault the direction. It's just not my kind of film, and that struggles for me to alleviate towards anything aside from discussing things such as performance, such as set design, production, because it's what you'd expect with a Fincher film. 11 films in, right? Yeah, it looks great. He's got a great performance from his lead actor, not on par with his last few films that we've spoke about. But what are your thoughts on that direction? Because I don't want to sit here and moan for sort of 40 minutes, but there's so little to say compared to his other films, which is sad because he normally picks these really interesting dramas or adaptations, taking stuff from his own life, putting into it. And again, I know this is personal, it's related to his dad, and I'm just sort of sat there like, not what a waste, but I'd love to be seeing him do any other film right now.
It's not like any of the other films he's directed because he doesn't try and make it into a Fincher film. What he's trying to do is he's basically trying to make it seem like you're watching Citizen Kane, but kind of before Citizen Kane. So he employs some similar filmmaking techniques, some similar shot selections, and
the globe dropping is the same as the alcohol bottle dropping. And Gary Oldman probably has to do that 500 times to get it right.
Of course, and some of the framing, the use of shadows with the black and white film and everything like that. The slow pans, the framing of various different shots. It's all from Citizen Kane. It's all from that film. It's none of the kind of standard Fincher kind of styled shots that he's used to doing. Like, you don't get any of the weird kind of impossible shots of him going through doors and, no time lapses or anything like that. You don't get too many extreme close-ups or anything like that. There's a few things that are completely missed, which isn't you'd normally see in his kind of films, which does kind of feel like an out-of-film experience because you're like watching the film, you're like, I know Fincher made this, but it could feel like any director made this. And maybe that's what I am not a big fan of the film with, if that makes sense. It's very well done. I want to point out, it is a very well shot film. It's a very well directed film. But I can't see Fincher being the one making this. I can't see his trademark, his stamp on it. I don't know if the perfectionism came into it at any stage or anything like that. I'm sure it would have. But I feel like any director who wanted to make a black and white film about Citizen Kane, who decided to use similar filmmaking techniques used in Citizen Kane, would have made the same film. Maybe they wouldn't have got the same performances or different performances out of their lead stars. But this film isn't defined by anything in that sense because it's trying to be Citizen Kane. It's trying to copy the same techniques. It's trying to go through the same processes. It's almost trying to kind of flesh out a very similar story to it. So, you know, it's almost trying too hard to be the film that it's about, if that makes sense. And that's where I feel like it gets lost, for me at least. But you wouldn't have that same kind of thing because you haven't seen the film, so therefore you wouldn't have that same context.
Well, this is what's interesting. I don't have the context, but I've got comparisons. I'm going back to the stuff we've done on the channel before. I can't remember if you won the AI review for Spielberg last year, and obviously it's very different circumstances there. Obviously, AI was a film Spielberg was going to do with Kubrick, and he sort of honoured Kubrick's career in life by doing the film after, doing it exactly how Kubrick would have done it, following Kubrick's pre-production, all this stuff. And it was the most... It was the film... It didn't sound out. It was a great discussion. It's a great film. I enjoyed it. It's very different. But it doesn't ever feel like I'm watching a Spielberg film. And not that you need that whimsical wonder, but it and then that in my head translates to Quentin Tarantino and Death Proof, where Tarantino, I'm not saying he ever consciously made a terrible film, but he consciously made Death Proof to be like those grindhouse films from the 70s. It was very intentional. It's how the film's shot, how it's funded, how it's staged, how it was released in a double bill. And I think it's the worst of his career by a country mile. But he didn't intend to make a bad film. It's got a cult following. But it plays like a grindhouse double feature, which is its purpose. And it makes me wonder with Mank, this sounds maybe not like saying anything about his dad, but almost like, was this his dad's film? Like, was he making, had they spoke about it in the past when they're younger, was there more than just a screenplay? Was there discussions and discussions? And even little bits like getting Gary Oldman to play the lead for a real life person that was 20 years younger than Gary Oldman was at the time of filming, not being ageist. But you rewind the clocks 20 years back, and we were discussing recently, Gary Oldman was almost in some Fincher films in the 90s. And yes, Kevin Spacey was meant to play this role, but it's very interesting that I wonder how much of this has been in his head for a very long time. If I just want to make this film for my dad, which I fully respect and understand. And I just think that's where it ends up. To me, you lose a lot of what makes his films great. And hey, it's going to have its fans, But I mentioned Gary Oldman. What are your thoughts of him? I mean, I can't sit here and say I've ever seen a Mank script. I've ever read a script. Sorry, I've never seen an interview. I know that recently Gary Oldman obviously played President in Oppenheimer. Heads to toe makeup. A lot of people didn't recognize it's Gary Oldman. I knew it was him straight away by his eyes. One of the most distinct eyes in Hollywood. But in the case of this film, David Fincher basically said, nope, I want you to look like you. You're not going to wear makeup. You're not going to wear prosthetics because I want a performance from you. And I respect that, because with a biopic, and the problem is, I'm not going to moan about Marvel, but in this modern day adaptation discourse we talk of, this comic book character doesn't look exactly like this actor, or this doesn't look like this. And it's this pathetic whinging where people lose sense of the word adaptation. I'm not talking race swapping. I'm not talking gender swapping. I mean the term adaptation. It is not that original source material, and it never will be, because it's being adapted no matter what medium you do it on. And I actually quite like it sometimes to watch a biopic and they don't look alike. It's great when they do look like them. In Fincher's case, Mindhunter, although I've not watched it, I have seen the photos of the cast and who he's
yeah, they are scarily close.
Yeah. So, and if he wanted to do it for Mank, he would have done it for Mank. But in this case, he put actors in. Some he's done it before, some he hasn't. But I want to know your thoughts on Gary Oldman, because I think Gary Oldman's great in this film. But again, I'm glad it's not another Churchill where we put Gary Oldman in the makeup and told him to be Gary Oldman. But it feels like it's his own performance.
He delivers on the script, and the script is very old-timey speak, and should we say of the time. And he's able to kind of do his normal chameleon ways and just fit into any role that's put in front of him and pull out like a stellar performance from it. Yeah, believable, completely believable in the role. I haven't seen any interviews of Herman J. Mankiewicz, you know, outside of the film. Maybe I should have part of research and stuff like that. But as far as kind of developing the character and kind of, you know, making me follow the narrative and, you know, allow me to learn what the character is like, I get a very good picture of what he was like as a person just from the performance. That's down to his accent, his kind of body movements and stuff like that. But even then, he's been told to look kind of the same. He's been told to look like Gary Oldman. But when you're watching the film, you don't think, oh, that's Gary Oldman. They do a good enough job where by the end of the film, it's like, oh, okay, so that's Mank on screen. That is Mank as a character. Even for an actor who's been in so many roles that, you know, he does kind of, you know, he transcends it, doesn't he? Because you recognize him in so many different things. But he does a very, very good job in this film. And it was a very good leading performance.
Yeah. And I think we know that with David Fincher, that we're 11 films in, and he does get, a lot of the time, he's been able to get the career best performances from actors, or at least a film so distinct in their career that you look at that and think, boom. I'm not comparing Gary Oldman to the leads of his previous films, but Gary Oldman's probably one of the most experienced actors of his leads that he's had that we've spoke about. You know, just going off the last couple, you've had very young actors. You had Rooney Mara, you've had Jesse Eisenberg, Ben Affleck, obviously a veteran of sorts, but still, you know, he's in his early 40s, I think, at this point when he does Gone Girl. Rosamund Pike in her 30s. Whereas you bring Gary Oldman, who is one of my favorite actors of all time, from the work he's done in his career and everything else with him. I'm not saying it's not one of his best performances. Like, that's not the purpose of these reviews, but because of how such an incredible career Gary Oldman's had and how distinct his performances have been, one of the best character actors in the history of the big screen, as far as I'm concerned. It's great to see him in a leading role. It really is. He doesn't get many of those. He doesn't get many lead roles. But at the same time, I'm not going to remember this as, when I think of Gary Oldman films, it just doesn't sit anywhere near the top of my head. Like, oh yeah, he was in Mank.
It's one of those. It's one of those where it's almost like he does a good enough job where you kind of disappears into the role, but at the same time, it's not a defining performance from his career. Yeah,
and it's hard to compare to others because, again, Gary Oldman has been in so much, and even people like that crop up in this, like Charles Dance, and you kind of think, oh yeah, he was Alien 3. They did work together. But then you've also got Amanda Seyfried, who I think she's a massively underrated. We'll talk about this, but we spoke for me live. Amanda Seyfried, I remember her in this film, Stealing the Film. And I know she was nominated for supporting actress. I think she's had a very, not underrated career, but when Mank came out, I think she started to get her due of people being, she's done more than Mean Girls, and she's actually done a lot of great films.
She's done a lot of stage work, I want to say.
Yeah,
she's done a lot of TV shows, a lot of theatre, a lot of TV.
And I think it's interesting that she does. I don't say she doesn't shine as well as she did before. No, that's really unfair. But she's, as you said it to me, she's not in it as much as we remember. And I remember it being like her film, and I'm sitting back now thinking, was this the typical Oscars talk of when certain supporting roles have been built up so much in mindset and discussion that actually, because for a support role, you don't need to be in it. Actors have won awards being in it for, like, was it 4 minutes when Judi Dench won one or something? Yeah. But I remember Amanda Seyfried almost being like a co-lead, which is not at all. And she's great in this film. But again, is this the 3-year gap of not watching it and not sort of caring about it? And then out of circumstances, it's very different because I can't fault a performance in it. I'm just, as you said earlier, I'm kind of bored with this film. And with her role being a supporting role, mainly dialogue moments, the real life side of her character was far more integral than what she's represented in this film. And I actually think it does a bit of disservice. But Amanda Seyfried, I think she does a phenomenal job of what she's working with.
No, she did a really, really good job in the film. And yeah, just kind of bouncing off the back of that, I think as before we went live, I'd said, I remember her being in the film more. I remember her having a bigger role in the film, which is crazy because on this rewatch, I've turned it around and gone, I don't remember Lily Collins being in this film as much as I remember. I thought she was in it a lot less, and she was actually in it a lot more than I thought. It's a really interesting one because both of them do good performances in their roles. I haven't seen Lily Collins in much, at all outside of this film, but I thought she did a great job in it. But Amanda Seyfried, really underrated actress, really, really underrated actress. And I wish she was in some more kind of, bigger budget films, some more films where she can actually show kind of her acting talent as well. It seems like she's one of those actresses that everyone kind of knows, but you wouldn't be able to string together like 3 films that she's been in. I could probably name this film and Mean Girls off the top of my head without actually looking on IMDb. Past that, I would struggle. Was it a TV show Dope Sick? Was that the one that she was in?
Yes, she was in that with Michael Keaton.
But that's it. It kind of stops there. It's one of those things where she's a well-known actress. Oh, she was in Time.
Yeah, Justin Timberlake.
There we go with Justin Timberlake. There we go. We got there, but at the same time, it's one of those where you're struggling past the films, but you know the actress, if that makes sense. It might be one of her best performances in her career between this and Mean Girls. I mean, Mean Girls, she's quite a comedic performance. This film is taken a little bit more seriously, and she actually shows kind of her acting talent in it. But yeah, it's one of those where, once again, like, Fincher's able to get a good performance out of a good actress or a good actor. But
yeah, no,
it's one of those where it's like, even after talking about kind of the direction being very different and trying to kind of learn off Citizen Kane, even after kind of, going through the story beats and stuff like that that have been put through, the characters, this movie is still very boring. For a well-acted, well-directed film, this film is boring. It's crazy. It really is.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I want to talk about something I've really enjoyed this film. I saw the score. Atticus Ross, Trent Reznor once more reuniting with David Fincher. Most of their scores we spoke about have been not just atmospheric, but very electronic in the sense of how they sort of come together. Did Soul come out the same month as well, which they both, I believe one of them or both of them composed, the Pixar film. But this score is the best thing about this film, if I'm being honest. The score's phenomenal. Now, obviously, as you'd expect, with this being set in the 30s, with this film about film, of course, the keynote is, yes, you can't do your atmospheric electronic sounds we've done for 10 years. Use classical instruments. And I think it was a pretty outstanding soundtrack, to the point that I believe there's an extended edition release, which is an hour and a half long. And I do like those traditional scores. Obviously, people are going to talk about Babylon. I know Babylon's more jazz than obviously what this is, but I can't fault the score. The score is actually one of the highlights of the film. I really enjoyed how it was used. And it's great that Fincher's sort of found this collaboration, even a couple of films into his career, that he stuck with these two. And that it has right now. I've not seen The Killer yet. I'm going to try and watch it in cinemas. By the time this video comes out, I'm hoping I've seen it. I'm hearing amazing stuff about the score, which is very exciting, because doing the series, I very much enjoyed discovering their music a bit more. But what are your thoughts on the score? Because it's so different to what they've done prior, which is what makes it great as well.
Yeah, it's classical and sweeping. It's of the time and of the period. It evokes old Hollywood, which is exactly the kind of vibe that you want from the film. It's fascinating because these two now have built up such a good relationship and have been able to do so many different genres of music within their career, working with Fincher, and that kind of flicks back to what they managed to do in The Killer, which we'll talk about when we watch that, which is very much kind of back to that kind of pulsating thriller roots, whereas this one is very kind of calming but swami, and very, very Hollywoody, but also 1930s Hollywoody. Just by playing the soundtrack and playing the score, you'd immediately go, oh yeah, this film's set in like 1930s or 1940s, that kind of time period. You put immediately to there. That's exactly what you need from a film. You need it to kind of put you in the mood for the story, if that makes sense, and then kind of pull you through. So once again, fantastic score by both of them. And yes, they did do Soul that year. Both of them did Soul that year and won the best original score for Soul that year. And
again, Soul, great film. Came out the same month.
Phenomenal score as well. Unreal score in that. That is top tier score.
One of the most depressing Christmas Day films I've ever watched in my life, though, not gonna lie. Not as depressing as I was watching Wonder Woman 1984 immediately after. God, what a year, COVID. I mean, we spoke about the score. We spoke about a bit of Oscars. Let's talk some legacy. So, we mentioned this was Fincher's first Netflix film. This had the limited of limited releases, as these Netflix films often do. Normally, it's the Oscar qualifying circus, where it's got to be in LA cinemas for at least once in a cinema chain. It's grossed $120,000. It's incomparable data to anything else. Again, incredibly limited screenings. The box office takings per screen wasn't huge anyway, and it did have its wide release December the 4th, 2020 on Netflix. We can't get streaming data, so we can't tell you how well it was done at home. So it kind of rules out the legacy side of things. But it is interesting. We've spoken a lot about Netflix and streaming residuals. And we've spoken about his Oscars. This was nominated for 10. And it won 2. Best cinematography, best production design. And again, we mentioned earlier, the competency of this film is pretty phenomenal. I can't fault the set design. I can't fault the costumes. The makeup looks great. The set design, the cinematography. It's clicked as a film. It's just the context of what's clicked is just not interesting, which to me falls apart. And this is maybe where it will be different. You know Citizen Kane. I don't know Citizen Kane. And for me, not that it's not interesting. If I watched this film and I was flabbergasted, do you know what I'd have done? I'd have gone and watched Citizen Kane straight after. And I can give you a comparison. I watched The Disaster Artist before I watched The Room. I loved The Disaster Artist so much. I went to The Room in Prince Charles Cinema with Tommy Wiseau in attendance, which was a wild experience.
Yeah.
That's because I was able to watch something like Disaster Artist and be like, wow, I really want to know about what was just happened, what was just made. Obviously, 2 completely very different films, right? One of them meant to be one of the worst ones ever made. This one being the film about one of the best ones ever made. But what is your thoughts on the whole Oscar side of it? Because again, we've spoken about it already quite a chunk, but I can't seriously say I don't agree with ABC. I'll be really honest. If it wasn't the COVID year, if this film came out tomorrow, this is getting no recognition at the Oscars, if I'm being really honest.
This didn't get released at any film festivals, did it? I'm just
no,
very
I don't
quickly.
think so.
They
were basically all cancelled that year. London was online. Venice,
yeah, but I still remember that.
cancelled.
I still remember watching certain films for the online festival in London. I don't remember Mank being on the schedule at all.
No, Saw was on the schedule, but you had to attend in person, and there's like one screening, which was really dumb. But yeah, I don't think Mank was a part of festival season at all.
Interesting. I think
because they didn't need the Oscars lifted the rule that year where films for that Oscar year didn't need to be shown in cinemas at all. So of course Netflix says, okay, we're not going to do it because we don't need to.
Yeah. No, I think this film, this probably kind of attributes to, you know, the fact that no one's talking about this film anymore because it didn't have any impact at all on release, just to zero. Only people who care about Citizen Kane or care about Fincher or go, "Ooh, it's a black and white film. I'm sure it'll be quirky." You know, they're the only people who would have watched this film, and then you'd have even less people coming back afterwards saying they were fans of it and kind of spreading the word. It's a real interesting one because it has everything that should be going for it, but it just isn't that film that it's trying to be. And yet, the American press loved it, and therefore it got nominated for 10 Oscars and won 2 Oscars, which, to be fair, best cinematography, I'm shocked that Nomadland didn't win that, and I'm
it won everything else.
I don't like Nomadland. That should have won best cinematography and best production design. I'm trying to think of the other films that are out that year that had good production design.
Tenet didn't even get nominated for best soundtrack that year. It says it all.
Yeah, my God. Well, I can understand why it wasn't nominated for sound design, but
yeah, we're going to get Ludwig his revenge when he wins Oppenheimer.
So production design, yeah, it was up against Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, Tenet, News of the World, and The Father.
God, News of the World. I mean, The Father's one set. It's set in a flat.
Ma Rainey's set in a jazz basement as well, I guess, and Tenet at least has decent, you know, production.
But it's a blockbuster, isn't it?
It's
a miracle that film came out, which is still like not to turn to a known chat, but you think about Oppenheimer making 950 million, right?
Yeah.
The fact that Tenet made 200 million. Now we know it's COVID. It does show how insane it was that they actually released that film in August 2020. Like looking back, I'm not calling it a dreadful decision. There's a lot worse things happening in the world, such as you know, Eat Out for a Tenner, whatever that was, that actually spread it all. But it is wild. But that is the only filmmaker that would have actually had the power to say, I'm releasing my film in a pandemic. But 2020 is a wild year. You look, everything got delayed to the following year.
It was an unusual year for the Oscars. Maybe
well, they had the London.
You know what? In a few years' time, we may be doing a video on this year's Oscars.
Well, you just got to think that they engineered the ceremony for Chadwick Boseman to win Best Actor, who didn't win Best Actor, but then made Best Actor last. But the real winner, Anthony Hopkins, didn't turn up because he's in his 80s and said, because of COVID, I can't attend this awards ceremony. So the show ended with his face on the screen and it cut to black. One of the worst endings to an Oscar year ever.
Probably the most awkward ending, even more awkward than Moonlight winning Best Picture over La La Land, because that was just hilarious.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and Anthony Hopkins, when he did pick up the Oscar and win it, he said, "I don't deserve this. It should have been for Chadwick Boseman," which I've got mad respect for. But that the whole thing's wild. The Oscars telling. I mean, the fact that it's Anthony Hopkins, let alone any person. Sorry, you're only going to get your Oscar if you turn up in London at 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. Again, this is a man in his late 80s or mid to 80s. I don't mean to insult him, but for them to try and force that on Anthony Hopkins was actually ridiculous. The more you think about it, and there's a lot of things out of touch with reality. We know Hollywood's one of them. But yeah, one of the many ridiculous moments that the Oscars have had over the years. But I mean, normally at this point we talk about a favorite scene. Do you have a favorite scene?
I do.
I've got one.
I jump in
first.
Go for it.
Charles Dance's monologue about the monkey. Only because it made me want to go back and watch Game of Thrones because I love Charles Dance. That's it. Cheerio. Couldn't care less about the rest of the film.
That was a very good scene. I do like. I'm trying to remember the character's name now. Was it? It was the Hollywood boss who Mank was trying to run against and take down and stuff like that. Who he wasn't a fan of. The head of MGM. Was it? Like this is horrible that I can't remember his actor's name.
It's fine. It's fine. Just don't recount.
Yep. He had a scene where he basically explains to Joe, who is Herman Mankiewicz's brother, basically how Hollywood works. And it's a walking scene, and they walk through the entire set and the entire studio. And I distinctly remember kind of that scene, and then him walking into a giant kind of not stadium, but like a kind of theater stage. And he stands in front of all the actors and basically tells them that they're going to be cutting their pay. And it's just that entire scene from start to finish of him kind of introducing who he is, talking about what makes the movies work, walking through the soundstage, walking through all the sets, and then immediately going and cutting everyone's knees off. Fantastic scene. The only scene I was looking forward to in the film, apart from the organ grinders monkey scene.
One thing I give it credit for is I like the fact he's talking about WGA strikes back then because it was quite timing for us, I guess. And I did like that dynamic because when the guilds were first introduced, they were frowned upon. They weren't took in like they are now. Whereas obviously now everybody's a part of them if you're in that sector, in that industry, which shows how important they are. And once again, reiterates the importance of these strikes. They're still happening today. Time this video going up. Unless there's been a miracle over the weekend, but we know there is some.
Arliss Howard. Sorry, I finally got it. Arliss Howard. There we go.
And Jeff, final thoughts on the film, because I'll be really honest. I don't like coming on here to bash films. We never do it, especially in a series talking about a director whose work I absolutely love, who I had a phenomenal time discussing for a few months. It's just a film that's not for me. And that's how I can leave the review. Because again, I've said it's competently directed. I'm not interested. Maybe I'll watch Citizen Kane, and maybe people are fuming that haven't seen it. We're on a film channel. And if I watch Citizen Kane, maybe I will appreciate Mank more. Would I watch Citizen Kane and go back and watch Mank? Probably not. If I'm being honest, probably not. I probably follow up Citizen Kane with another film I've not watched, which is meant to be the best ever, which I won't embarrass myself and say.
It's fine. I haven't seen A Streetcar Named Desire. I haven't seen On the Waterfront. So
everyone's missing a lot of films.
There are films. Everyone's missing films.
Yeah, everyone is. And also, one thing I say, time's an ally. We're both 27. There's so many films that I know people have seen in their early 40s, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm like, I've got time. It's not a competition to watch every film, and especially the way I say it, these big ones, right? I don't just want to chuck Citizen Kane on whilst I'm at work. Have a crap day at work. Go and put Citizen Kane on. It has to be you're in the mindset to watch a film like Citizen Kane, and that's the best way to watch classic films. If there's a cinema release, then more chance of going. If it's very different circumstances, I don't just watch them for the sake of it. I try and do that with more modern films to tick them off. But yeah, my final thoughts on Mank is it's not my cup of tea.
Yeah. For me, it's not a film I'm going to go back to. I think it's going to be a long time in the future before I revisit this. Even if I do end up watching Citizen Kane in that time, this film won't be as part of that rewatch. And that's kind of the only appeal this film has anymore. Like this is almost like a kind of reconstructed kind of you know, hearsay documentary based on the writing behind this film. That's kind of all it's got going for it nowadays. I mean, there are black and white films that people can go and watch if they wanted to watch just black and white films that I think use the media a little bit better. There are, you know, old school films if you want that old timey speak, unless you're doing like a Gary Oldman retrospective where you're going through all of his films and all of his characters, which would take you a year to go through. Or unless you are doing what we're doing and doing a Fincher retrospective where you're going through all of his films, this film ends up being a tick in a box, no matter what you look at. It's not like, oh yeah, I was going to watch this film. Oh, I'm really excited going into this. It's like, I'll see how we get on with Mank, and that's never a good sign when it comes to filmmaking. That's never a good sign, kind of, when it comes to, you know, the legacy of that film. So realistically, this film sits pretty far down on my Fincher rankings, possibly lower than Alien 3, which, I mean, I liked, but then again, I've got my reasons for liking Alien 3. So it's an interesting one because it's one of his highest regarded films as far as, you know, award winning, but at the same time, it's probably one of his lowest rated films as far as, you know, we're concerned looking back on it.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you. And it's kind of sad way to end this video, but you know, at the end of the day, we're 11 episodes in. Because this is the penultimate one, it probably comes across sadder than what it actually is. But we do have one more episode of the David Fincher Retrospective. That is The Killer, starring Michael Fassbender. I know you've already seen it. I'm looking forward to watching it. And it'll be a nice way to end the series on that. And maybe some other stuff will come down the pipeline too. But yeah, it's a weird way to end it out. We've got lots happening on the channel. There's a lot of TV happening at the moment. The Gen V, I keep calling it Gen Z. Gen V has finished. Loki finishes this Friday. The Marvel's out this Friday. There's a lot of films coming out. As much as the strikes and frustrations have been, we're starting to get a few blockbusters. We're starting to get some Oscar films. So it's a great time to be part of the industry. And we're looking forward to carrying with those. There should be some home media stuff coming up. There's been a bit of background stuff with those. So when there are videos to go up, they will go up on the channel. Of course, we've got our weekly Friday film. There's a lot of things happening. Check out our update video because there's a lot more things in play. Doctor Who's going to be a big thing this month as well. So go grab us on linktree.com/cinemasavvy. You can get that onto our socials, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Letterboxd. We put all of our stuff on those. And as I said, if your thoughts on Mank, comment, are we wrong? Do you hate it too? Hate it? Hate's a strong word. Do you dislike it too? Let us know all your thoughts because I'm curious to hear it. And I'm curious to hear if you do like this film too. So do get involved. But once again, thank you everybody at home for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.